Hey, how's it going all? Just back with my live stream this week. I had to reschedule today just to I have a scheduling conflict tomorrow, but I'll just see if anybody's around. Do kind of my typical usual routine. I don't know what to say. There's been some interesting things that I've been following with the economy. I would say I follow that pretty closely every day. And I think it's just, I find it interesting. The commentary is, I don't know what to make of it. I mean, it just looks like there's just a lot of chatter right now related to a recession coming in the mainstream news. And so the thing I wanted to sort of use that as a springboard for discussion today about money, finances, the rich, the poor, and all that kind of stuff. And, just again, for me personally, further motivate the fact that I think we're in the end times. Again, largely because of what's going on economically, and just what's going on in the world and how many people are living, on the brink of poverty. And I've noticed even on Fox, I believe, or one of the mainstream news outlets is posting a Left Behind series. And this is, again, the mainstream. Let me double check if it's Fox. But, this is, again, mainstream news. Talking about a homelessness epidemic. Yeah, it's Fox News. So this is all in the last week, really. They've been posting, the first one I saw, in California in general, and then they went specifically into a Left Behind series, homelessness crisis in Los Angeles, Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, and all that. So they're going and targeting these different cities and then explaining, how that there is this problem and there are larger and larger groups of people being quote unquote left behind. And so again, to me, if it's reaching the lips of mainstream news, that's something that has been going on for a while and is becoming so obvious and noticeable that they have to address it. I've heard a few stories in the last year or so of people visiting these cities, and it's just, again, becoming obvious. It's very, very noticeable. And, the narrative of, they're all mentally ill and all that kind of stuff is falling apart, that you can't explain away this much homelessness and poverty with just people on drugs. That doesn't make sense. In any society, one would think there will always be a small percent, of people who just don't want to integrate and don't integrate well for whatever reason. And then, drugs and all that could be a motivating factor, but it's becoming, like I said, very, very noticeable, and it's growing, and I think that's the thing that, again, to me is more and more evidence that that the economy is falling apart. And then if it's reaching the mainstream news, that's, to me, it's true. Why? Again, I'm not saying mainstream news is true. I'm saying that if the problem is so bad that it's reaching that level of acknowledgement, it's kind of too late, at that point. And I think that's where, I was watching some of this trolls versus trolls and some of the stuff with Tim Osmond, with all this e-begging going on and stuff like that. And I mean, obviously I find that sad, when people do that, when it's not sincere, but that also, to me, in and of itself, proves that there's something wrong. When people, whether they're bald or flat or shills, have to get on YouTube and then ask people for money just to move, from one city to another. And I'm not trying to trivialize other people who have genuine financial need, but that's sad. That people have to do that they have to go online and start, saying that they don't even have enough money to move from one city to another. Why is moving so expensive? Why are the lease contracts, and I've been through this a couple times in my life, and it is expensive. In the US, when people break leases and all that, it's not to the benefit of the person who's taking on the lease. It's especially in the US. In Canada, they're a little bit more for the people, and ensure that contracts can't be written so aggressively that the quote unquote common man gets financially pressed, but too much. But here, it's in favor of the corporations, and the quote unquote landlord. And so, it's all these costs are rising. People are, to me, again, this is a sign of the times where people are going to the YouTube and other places to quote unquote e-beg. We joke around about it in those instances because, I would agree that a lot of them are just using the ball earth, flat earth discussion, which is a very, very serious one, to line their pockets. But again, to me, it's just all this economic reality is reaching, every corner. It's not something that can be isolated or contained if it is as grand and as broad as it looks like it is. And if America is struggling and we're one of the better, quote unquote, better countries, in terms of just our, economic position, our development, being a quote unquote first world and all that, I can only imagine what's going on elsewhere and the uncertainty and fears that people have. And they would feel it before us, like it would make sense why other countries would feel the quote unquote pain before us, because they're the ones who are producing all these goods that we're consuming. And so we're going to get hit, quote unquote, hit last. That just makes sense from like a supply chain perspective, because we're the end user of most of these things, consumer. And the Bible actually predicts that, and in Revelation, which I'll talk about. So, that's that to me is the state of the world. And I have to always leave open the possibility, just for humility. And sometimes I still look around at what's going on. I'm like, where is God in this? Because it just looks ridiculous. Like people who got homeless everywhere. We got people e-begging. We have people debating the shape of the earth. We don't even have any certainty on that. Majority of the world's not allowed to talk about God in any serious way. People get emotional, even quote unquote truthers. You can go to the Hebrews and then they'll get emotional if you bring up flat earth when the Bible obviously supports a flat stationary earth. And then so there's just the world is just populated from end to end, in my opinion, with just people who are not interested and willing or allowed to talk about God, in any kind of serious and real way. And I don't know what to make of it. To me, it just doesn't make sense. We're allowed to talk about everything else, every other degenerative topic. Every stupid thing really is allowed to be discussed, every form of gossip, but God as a real entity is not allowed, and so to me, that would be strange if that was not for a particular purpose, because again, especially if a person is already a truther and a quote unquote spiritual person, one would think that that would be a topic that they would be naturally inclined to speak of openly. And, it's just, I was watching a few minutes ago, even just an interaction between the Hebrews here in Houston and then this guy, Vocab Malone. They're both ball earthers. So if the earth is flat, in my opinion, the Bible is true. And then if the Bible is true, the earth is flat. And so we have two essentially shills just debating, back and forth. And they're both going back and forth about God and the scriptures and all that kind of stuff. And then they both think that they live on a spinning beach ball, flying through space. And so this is just my vantage point. I'm not saying that I have all the answers or everything I know or believe is correct, but just from my eyes looking out, the world just looks like it's just completely retarded, and I don't know how to put that in a nicer way. And it's very, very isolating. But, and I don't say this for pity, there's no place else I'd rather be, and I say that sincerely. There is literally no place I would rather be, because everything else going on is completely ridiculous. And, I think, again, the thing that I have to watch in my own life is just try and figure out a way. And I haven't figured this out yet. And I think it's a bit of an experiment for me, is how to walk this line, this boundary carefully, and not ever look on the other side with any seriousness, but also not be rude to the people that, I feel are, who just are not allowed, in my opinion, the way I see it, by God, to talk about certain things, and it's not something that's very easy for a person like me to navigate, because in general, I don't have a filter. I was always this person throughout my life. Like, I spoke my mind, not even necessarily spiritual topics, but whatever, I didn't hide the way I was feeling ever. And so this is a challenge. To me, I get frustrated because I'm like, to me, it's not useful, because I'm essentially catering and pandering to a group that are essentially like robots, programmed to not speak about many, many things that are obvious. But, this is the world that we live in. I can't change it. And to be honest, I don't have a better alternative. Then I think that's the thing that I catch myself regularly, is like, it's hard for me to complain on the day-to-day amongst people too much, because I don't really have a better alternative. It's like, well, what would I do if I push reset on the world? I don't know. What is the alternative? Eating off the land. That's about it, I guess. I mean, what else can we do? I mean, it would be nice to learn about our surroundings and what's going on and do that in a structured way, but to what end will that get us? And I think that's the part, in my opinion, where a lot of this stuff is like hyperbole and exaggeration that's going on in the world right now. It's like, it's so ridiculous that anybody who does not call it out and realize how insane it is, God can't be working with that person. They have to be an actor. God is just using them, again, to display the hyperbole to his children. And hopefully we are one of them, because if we're not, this whole thing is dumb. This whole thing is just completely ridiculous. And, I want to bring out a couple passages just to sort of illustrate my point. And, I'll start with the Lord's Prayer. Just as a routine, I always do this. Matthew 6:9 reads, "After this manner, therefore, pray ye, Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen." So that's that. Also wanted to make a quick point for those people out there who are kind of following the economy more. And again, it's hard to avoid some of the news because it's everywhere now. But there's this notion of this yield curve inverting. And so a yield curve is basically just a relationship between interest rates and the borrowing period. And so normally, in a normal scenario, again, I'm not saying interest is a good thing because the Bible speaks against it, but for the world that we live in, the longer that you borrow, or let's say we're the lender and we're lending out money, if we're loaning out money for a longer duration, one would think that we should get more and more interest, because there's more risk. If I loan somebody money and I'm not going to see the full return for 20, 30, 40 years, I should get a little bit more of a percent interest, because we're engaging in that financial investment together longer, and so there's more and more risk. And so if somebody, especially somebody well, or the way our satanic system is a credit rating, if a person has a high credit rating and you borrow or lend them a certain amount of money for a little while, 6 months, it's not as risky. It's not as unlikely that they will not be able to repay you back with the interest. And so you should get quote unquote less yield. And so this yield curve inverting, which people will see you'll see in the news now, it's happened a couple times recently, has been a precursor to recessions in the past. And so it basically means that short-term interest rates and long-term interest rates are higher than the ones in the middle. And so instead of having like, an increasing curve, like I said, would be a normal scenario where shorter term lending gets lesser and then longer term gets higher yields. You actually have short and long term higher than in the middle. And so that's the situation that we have now, and it's happened recently, in the last week or two. And so, to me, these are the things that are trigger points for the corporate media, mainstream media to like have to talk about, the economy, because these are things that are now, again, obvious. The homelessness thing for us, anybody who's like just a normal human being who just looks around would see that there's more homeless, and even the mainstream's addressing that. They're a little late to the party, but yield curve's the same thing. There's just more and more KPIs and metrics out there that are showing that we're going through a slowdown, and it's worldwide. And America, like I said, is the majority customer, end user of most of these products worldwide. And so we're going to be the last to feel it, but we are the thing that will start causing this thing, in my opinion, to unravel when we start buying less and less things. And so, if the middle of the yield curve is like lower than the ends, it just means that people have just a fear and uncertainty in lending, unless it's really quick and they can get their money back, or it's a long-term thing where, they feel like over a long enough time period, things will steady out. So they don't want to, there's not as much of an appetite to lend in the middle range. And that is one of the many, many things that show that there's obvious uncertainty and slowdown happening, in the world when lending, quote unquote, dries up in that middle period. And so that's what's happening. And, just the whole concept of interest in and of itself is evil. So that's, for spiritual people, that's not, really that major of a thing to even sort of think about, I guess. But just the concept of charging interest on things is satanic, and infinitely more satanic when people are being charged interest on student loans to be lied to, and to be quizzed and tested on things when they should be rewarded with knowledge, intuition, and all that kind of stuff. And the people teaching should be the ones who are actually judged on how well they do, and that's why everything in this world is completely backwards. The student is grilled and quizzed, but the teacher is never questioned as to how well that they explain concepts. And in fact, the harder they are, the more difficult they make it, the more hoops they make the student jump through, the quote better of a teacher they're deemed to be, and smarter and all that kind of stuff. And so I remember one of our professors in undergrad, we didn't really understand what he was saying. And like, he always gave us the hardest tests and always scheduled them around holidays and stuff like that. And he was lauded, as like a tough professor and, all that kind of stuff. But I mean, that's just completely evil. I mean, we're not learning anything. Most people who graduated from my undergrad electrical engineering program don't really have a clue about the basics, and we still don't. And sadly, now we're now relegated to debating bald earth trolls who have most of their education from Wikipedia, and then they again test us, on things, and they're idiots, just flat out. It's becoming very, very obvious from Tim Osmond's hangout recently that I watched, and then Trolls versus Trolls and all that. We're just dealing with people who are regurgitating stuff from Wikipedia, getting on YouTube, and then hosting debates, every day. And so that's what's happening. It was kind of entertaining for me for a while, but even that, I don't want any part of that, because to me, it just brings back bad memories of the fact that how I was indoctrinated for many, many years in school. So, and then coupled with the fact that it's embarrassing, in my opinion, that we don't know with certainty what the shape of the earth is. To me, that's pathetic. And that's another thing where I need to figure out a way, and I don't know how to do this, but to not take out that frustration on other people. If other people don't care what the shape of the earth is in my own personal life and don't want to talk about it, or they don't want to talk about God or the quote unquote afterlife or whatever, to me, that's God's plan. That's his design. And then if God doesn't exist, then there is no reason to talk about those things. And so, obviously with flat earth and other things, I believe that God exists, and the God of the Bible exists immediately if the earth is flat and stationary. But I have to still somehow respect other people's, whether it's direct or indirect, desire to speak and not speak about certain things. But it's not easy. And I don't know if anybody's figured out a way, a life hack to navigate that well, please let me know. It's frustrating. I'll just be totally honest. I think that's why I host these hangouts, because if there's other people out there who feel similarly, pull up a chair. This is the place, because I find a lot of the goings on, if not really all of it, and I'm talking about things in my own life, I find it completely absurd. I find it ridiculous. And the thing that I also think is very, very challenging for me is that, like I said, even if these evil structures were not in place, where in my opinion we're forced to be a slave, I still would find it ridiculous. It's like, well, what are we supposed to do here? Just till the ground and then eat, and then what? It's like, just what do we do? And it's not funny, I guess, but it's kind of funny to me. It's like, to me, there's nothing productive to do. It's just literally, I don't know. I literally don't know. I mean, even in that situation, let's say in an ideal world where we're quote unquote free, we have, a parcel of land that we could live off of and all that kind of stuff. And then, I guess we have shelter. What do we do, practically, day to day? And so I think that it's, again, more and more obvious in these days that, the list of things to do are completely evil. And a lot of them are just stupid, like to dedicate time to, it's insane. And so that's where I'm at in terms of quote spirituality. It's like, to me, it's becoming more and more sort of, it's less scary to me, I would say, in these days, if God doesn't exist or we just die and then it's over, because if there's nothing quote better to do, I mean, I don't know. I don't have any ideas, and it's like, it's okay, because I certainly don't want anything related to this, what's going on, working 40 hours a week, if you're lucky to even have a job, and then, just begging a satanic entity for Federal Reserve notes, which I call tokens, just so you can go and eat garbage food and then have a couple drinks and then forget about your life and worry and stress and all that kind of stuff. And, it's just, it's insane. I saw a post on Reddit recently where like teachers were applauded because one of the other teachers was diagnosed with like some terminal thing. And then they all grouped their vacation time together and gifted it to that person who's ill. And like, they were like, again, I'm not sure if this is true, but it would not surprise me if this were the case. And then, the teachers were applauded, obviously, for their charitable act, looking after their fellow teacher. But what kind of system do we have in place where like somebody is diagnosed with a terminal disease and then they need to get quote unquote charity vacation days and all that just to like deal with their treatments? Like what kind of system do we live in? And then even more outlandish is that those people that are teaching people things, a lot of them are lies, or just talking in circles and stuff like that. So I don't know. To me, it's just the system itself, to me, is completely ridiculous. And, I don't really have a good answer for people who struggle with it as much as I do. Aside from, just talking about it once in a while, I guess, like, I don't really know what else to do because it's so ridiculous. And then I'll tie it into Luke, which I want to read today, of, something that, we have to avoid, if the God of the Bible is true, in the system that we live in, because it's very, very easy to get caught up into the mistake that was made by the individual in Luke chapter 16. And a lot of us are not in this position, being a quote unquote rich person, but at least we can learn the theory and not fall into that trap mentally, or in the quote unquote spiritual realm, to not do what these people do. So, I guess that's sort of what I would say my channel is all about, is, using some of the things that are going on around us as an example and a learning point of things not to do, or things to not, or ways to not think, to align ourselves with the God of the Bible, in case he's the one that created us all. And again, if the earth is flat, I mean, he's the God, of us. But it's an if and only if. To me, the God of the Bible is either completely evil or does not exist if the earth is a spinning ball. That's the way it is for me. Other people can digest the Bible with a different vantage point, but for me personally, I'm quote unquote all in on flat earth, and then waiting on certain other things from the Bible to come true. And then, if the earth is indeed a ball spinning, flying through space, which sounds ridiculous just saying it, but the God of the Bible is completely evil, and you would want to avoid an entity like that, or it's another God who is the architect of all of this, all of us. But okay, so I'm going to go into Luke 16. I'm just going to grab my Bible, sorry, really quick. Okay, so I'm going to we'll do Luke 16. This is a very, very good interaction. We can learn quite a bit, from this. Hey, Manny, what's up, dude? No, I just, I can't do tomorrow night, so I just decided to live stream tonight, man. I'll normally stick to Sunday nights, but I'm sorry if I kind of switch the time on people planning around, maybe trying to jump on tomorrow, but I'll normally stick to Sunday evenings. I kind of like it on Sunday, but I just can't do it tomorrow. So I'm going to go through Luke 16, 19 to 31. So this, again, to me, most of us are not this quote unquote rich, so it doesn't apply. It may, for those out there who've achieved success. It's just, to me, something that we have to be aware of with the God of the Bible. He likes certain things and dislikes other things, and he's very vocal about it. And why exactly, first of all, that he would make rich and poor, we don't know. Taking a step back, why he made this whole narrative, this whole earth, we don't know fully. But drilling in deeper, why did he make people? Still, we can't know the full reason. And then why he made rich and poor, good and evil and all that is again too much for us to wrap our mind around. But he likes charity. He just likes it. It's to me, it's obvious just from our own, chemical signals, most normal people, that helping somebody out and all that, even evil people acknowledge that that's a good thing, to do. And so, this again is, in my opinion, why I feel like we're in the end times in this beast system, because things that are just obvious as for us as humans are taken away, or not rewarded or not required. or not lauded, and so it's a different kind of system. It's not a human system. It's a beast system. It's a system that is non-human, that is essentially trying to take away all of our natural and normal chemical signals and turn them into something that is that of a beast, a very carnal, really robotic system, wanting, people like that, and to worship that as well, which is even more outlandish if somebody were to think that that's a good thing to do. And so, this shouldn't be that big of a deal, to do these kind of things to help out others. But again, in the system that we live in now, it is. And, that there are consequences for that, as described here in Luke 16. I'll start at verse 19. It's titled, let's see. It's titled The Rich Man and Lazarus. So Luke 16:19, there was a certain rich man which was clothed in purple and fine linen and fared sumptuously every day. And there was a certain beggar named Lazarus who was laid at his gate full of sores and desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. This individual is like in a very, very low state, just absolutely struggling, and was looking just for the crumbs that would fall from the rich man's table. And it came to pass that the beggar died and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried. And in hell he lifted up his eyes, being in torments, and seeth Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, sorry, I'm just going to get some water really quick. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, going back to, I'll start from 24. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. But Abraham said, Son, remember that thou in thy life receiveth thy good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things. For now he is comforted, and thou art tormented. And beside all this, between us and you, there is a great gulf fixed, so that they which would pass from hence to you cannot, neither can they pass to us that would come from thence. Then he said, I pray thee, therefore, Father, that thou wouldst send him to my father's house. For I have 5 brethren, that he may testify unto them, lest they also come into this place of torment. And Abraham saith unto him, They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them. And he said, Nay, Father Abraham, but if one went unto them from the dead, they will repent. And he said unto him, If they hear not Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded, though one rose from the dead. And so we have an example of that as well in Jesus Christ, who has risen from the dead, and is a testimony to God's power. And so this interaction is symbolic, in my opinion, of foreshadowing of that event as well. So this is an interesting interaction. And to me, I think this gets at the very heart of God, of the God of the Bible. He's actually in many ways obviously complex and brilliant. If he's the one who made all of this, all of us, incredible entity. But how simple and he is of the things that he requires of us. It's not that outlandish. This individual, again, this to me is hyperbolic. This person's rich, and it's one thing. It's one thing being rich, but all the person wanted here, this poor man, was just the crumbs. It's like that fell from the rich man's table. So the person would not even notice. That's what it's getting at here. It's that the person wouldn't even notice if the poor man was able to come and just literally eat when everybody's gone. It's like everybody stands up, leaves the table, and whatever's left, that people haven't, touched or eaten, or obviously if the individual is this poor, he probably would eat whatever he could get his hands on. That's all that he would want, and that's not, this is not funny, but like, that's insane, that this has to be in the Bible for people to know that this is something that God wants, and again, this is why God is doing this and making things that are so obvious to us, should be so obvious to us, not for a lot of people on earth. We don't know, to me, it's a little bit excessive retardation, but that's consistent with the ball earth, in my opinion, as well. So why God is quote unquote dumbed us all down to some degree or another, we can't know that for certain, but this to me is like, it's an exaggeration. It's like, it's kind of ridiculous that this quote unquote rich man would not even look towards giving this individual just a crumb, off of his table. And so the reason I wanted to bring this out is that everything going on to me right now is like hyperbolic. It's an exaggeration. And so it shouldn't be that hard, for people who are spiritual to know that this is completely ridiculous, for somebody to do this. And so that's insane. And so a lot of us are not in that position to have that kind of wealth, and that type of thing. And so it may not apply to us directly in terms of our finances, but what it can apply to us is that we understand the heart of God. Like, God cannot and will not look at the goings on of the world and see the poor growing in number and have these people who are just completely oblivious and in some cases mocking the poor. That can't continue on forever. One would think, and this is why I said that we're waiting on God to do certain things. Just because the earth is flat does not mean that the God of the Bible is true, because certain things at the end of the Bible have not come to pass yet. And so there is, to me, a waiting period, but, I just put this out there, and this is the way I'm sort of waiting on God, is like, we have to know characteristics of him in order to wait on certain things and when he will do things and all that kind of stuff. And to me, the poverty worldwide is again, a very, very strong indication, warning sign that, the God of the Bible is going to move soon, and like it says in many, many places, visit the world that he made. And because again, this kind of thing is so outlandish, and it looks like it was happening, throughout all generations, that people that are so wealthy are ignoring the very signals that every normal human would have. Like it's just people who are poor or don't have much money would know, if somebody is hungry and they see him, regularly, to try and help, even if it's a very, very small amount. And so, the verse here indicates that, and there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, which was laid at his gate. Reading back up to verse 19, there was a certain rich man, which was clothed in purple and fine linen and fared sumptuously every day. And there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, which was laid at his gate, full of sores. And so the person that he would see him every day, and I also found this also in India when I visited, that, rich people will have, homeless people and poor, right, living literally camped, right at the end of their driveway. And like that to me was a scene, like there's no zoning and all that kind of stuff in the parts of India that I visited. And so, at that time I was like, man, like, how does that work? Like you're literally like arm's reach from people who are homeless, And, it's just normal, and I think that it's not outlandish for me anymore, because it's really what's happening here in Houston. I mean, arm's reach from me downtown, there is lots of people who are homeless and chronically, because they're just setting up tents, and like they are proclaiming to us, whoever sees them, that that's the way it is, and all that kind of stuff. And so that's been happening, throughout human history, clearly from this passage, and it's happening now, and in greater and greater number. Places like America are becoming quote unquote third world, where it's just the poor are there, and they're everywhere, and growing in number, and it's just becoming routine now, and commonplace. And this verse, and really everything about the God of the Bible, speaks against proclaiming that to be normal. It's not. As much as we're programmed to think that that's normal, and just whatever, it's just the way it is. That's not the case. Even if we're not in the quote unquote last generation, it's not good for our spirit, our soul, to accept that, because what is described here, which I believe is symbolic, but, reflective of the quote unquote afterlife, is the poor are brought into Abraham's bosom. People that, imagine this scene of a person who in verse 21 is saying that he was desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table, and the dogs would lick his sores. Imagine if we saw that scene here. Just visualize that for a second. Just seeing a person regularly outside begging daily, and then the animals would come and lick their sores. What kind of person would we think that to be? Would we think that person is a prophet? Is the 144,000 is the God's elect? Is the 24 elders? All this kind of stuff. We would think a person like that is worthless. That's the way we've been programmed in this beast atheist system. But the Bible goes on to say that when that beggar passed away, and reading in verse 22, and it came to pass that the beggar died and was carried by the angels into Abraham's bosom. This is, this again is very, very literal, as much as it's hard for people to believe that God hides himself in the poor. And God doesn't care if we like it or not. We are, again, programmed to worship and exalt people who have power, status, and all that kind of stuff on earth. But that doesn't matter with God, and, it's in my opinion, and I speak to myself here, there's no point in fighting it. It's common sense and should be obvious to embrace that is the way it is. It's God doesn't care about the Donald Trumps and all these people on the world stage. They're just actors. It's just they are this person. They are this rich person who will not even give the crumbs off the table. We don't have a single leader at all levels of government and leadership on the world stage right now who's even thinking of how to give the crumbs to the homeless. Like, I'm talking just the leftovers of all of this absurd amount of money printing and all that excess, everything. No one can be bothered, to come up with a plan or anything, even just a fake plan. We have fake news, just even somebody talking about it, like whatever, it's an idea. We don't even have that. We're getting choked out by ridiculous debates. Everybody's debating everybody else, this and that, what is this verse, that verse, what's going on in Hollywood and all that kind of stuff. That's what we have, in the world right now. And then the poor are growing in number. And then, in my opinion, the God of the Bible will visit the world that he made and let people know what he actually cares about, and a majority of the goings on in the world right now, if not all of it, is completely satanic. And, further evidence to me by the fact that the poor are being left uncared for. And so what's happening here in Luke 16:19-31, I just want people to be aware, certainly, that it's happening, but we can't let this happen in us, even if it's a spiritual resistance towards this level of thinking and absurdity, because people like that are beasts. They're not human people who don't look after other people, and the poor. The Bible says this in many, many places, in particular in the book of James as well, that we're fooling ourselves if we do not stick up for the poor and the widows, and the defenseless. And so I'm certainly not wealthy. I suspect the few people that come by here are not either, and there's fewer and fewer people anyway who are holding all these Federal Reserve notes. But we have to call it out and be aware of the fact that the God of the Bible is against that at the macro level, and then also in our personal lives. Another thing too that I thought was kind of interesting in this is that in verse 25, but Abraham said, "Son, remember that thou in thou life received thy good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things." So this to me is another reason and way that shows that the world is completely perverted, because we are taught and programmed to think that resistance, struggle, pain, poverty, and all of that is just there for us to overcome it. It's just suck it up, pull your socks up, make it happen. And Steven Anderson, I posted a clip of him recently speaking against the poor, telling them to just go find a job, figure it out. That's what we're taught. But again, this is why the men of the Bible, in particular, those who are closest to God, like Abraham, in verse 25, Abraham said, "Son, remember that thou in thy life receivest thy good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things." Why would Abraham say that Lazarus has received evil things? Because he's received evil things. He's sitting on the street getting his sores licked by dogs. We have a world again right now that's so outlandish and retarded, but they will just make up every kind of other story, except that the fact that many, many homeless have received evil things. That's just what it is. And it hasn't changed in that time. And it's the same right now. We're living in a beast system that's now obvious. So it's institutionalized, the evil. So Abraham would easily be able to say this right now in the time that we live in. And these people are just honest. They're not sugarcoating what is actually happening. And that's what it is, and I think this is the great thing about the God of the Bible and the men of the Bible. The closer one gets to God, the less and less inclined to lies that they would have to be, and the Bible says that the 144,000 are not allowed to have guile. And one would think, again, the 24 elders are the same. One would also think that Abraham would probably be one of those 24. And however that works, obviously we're speaking from a human perspective, but the people closest to God, just say it like it is, just what it is. Like, you just look outside and there seems to be more and more homeless people. Wow. Okay. Well, why is that happening? Why do we see every single news clip on about everything? Joe Biden's campaign, Bernie Sanders' travel, all these Donald Trump's on a diet, golfing and all this kind of stuff. Every manner of insane debate discussing every stupid topic that one could think of, but you will never hear anybody say that poor people are receiving evil things, to be in the position that they're in. Like Abraham says here in verse 25, a great man of God, he's just speaking things that are obvious. And so, again, I just say this as a sort of friendly warning, a reminder for people who are inclined, have an ear towards the God of the Bible, that, don't be like this place, because this place is completely stupid. Like, I don't even know there's no other way to say it. That's why it's becoming increasingly difficult for me every day to function in this society, because the only thing you're allowed to say is stupid things or lies. And, I've had to say a fair share of lies throughout my life to sort of get through. But I'm struggling now with why. I'm telling lies, I'm sugarcoating things so atheists don't get offended when God is brought into the discussion. These things are obvious. There should not be some major revelation that, if you have enough wealth where the crumbs would be enough for somebody to feed themselves, and not have to feel, the pain and the fear and anxiety of hunger, you might want to give somebody, something. This should not be really like in the Bible or some real deep truth, that is being shared on Hangouts and stuff like that. This should not be like such a big deal, and this is again, the world that we live in and the people that we're surrounded by, and we've been a part of it. But I'm using this channel and whatever amount of energy I have to like remind people, don't be stupid. Like these people are idiots. They're out of their mind. A majority of the people on earth. And then anybody who's that wealthy and can't give the crumbs off their table to somebody who's right at, they see every single day and they don't bother to give them just something. That person has to be a robot. They have to be programmed to be that stupid, because no human would do that, and I think that, again, that's further evidence that this beast system has been in the works for many, many years, and we have verses that say that the Antichrist has been on earth, and the spirit of the Antichrist has been on earth for many, many, generations. And it has to be, because these kind of things would have to be passed down. No one can be programmed to be that dumb, unless, this mindset has been sort of passed down from generation to generation. And I think that whatever sort of ecosystem we've been around, for good or bad, to me, it's just shed all that stuff. Whatever amount that we've quote unquote fell for, just don't get involved in that, because it's completely ridiculous. And even sort of virtuous people, parents, will not teach us sometimes these basic things, and there, again, I'm not saying all parents are evil, obviously, but charity, and looking out for other people to the extent that the Bible goes you're not going to get taught that, certainly not from the church, which is essentially a corporation, certainly not from the government. You're not going to learn this in school, and all that kind of stuff. It's not going to be taught at all and reinforced unless we are interacting with the God of the Bible directly, which I would highly recommend people doing. Check in, with him and learn from him, learn from him directly, because like I've said many, many times, the state of affairs here on the world right now is just, it's completely ridiculous, and is bearing no fruit that will last. So I want to kind of wrap this up with Revelation 18, which, in my opinion, a person who is spiritually inclined, you don't even actually, in my opinion, have to be spiritual. I feel like I could read this. I feel like I could read Revelation 18, 17, and 18 to pretty much anybody, and take a poll, a survey of who they think that would be now if we're living in these days. And I could read it in the King James to them as well, and just say, if you were to have to pick a country that or place or something that fits the description written here in Revelation 17 and Revelation 18, who do you think it would be? I think a majority of the world, like people who are able to know basics about the goings on of the world, they would know that this is America. It has to be. It's obvious. And to me, I think, again, for those who live here in America, like I do, in my opinion, it would be wise to to consider this, especially in lieu of the verse that I just read, verses that I just read from Luke 16, that there are consequences for aligning with certain philosophies and ideologies that God hates. It's not a just free pass. This is just the way it is kind of thing. That's not the way it works with God, and I think the thing that's scary for me personally about that interaction with the rich man and Lazarus is not so much the rich man, because like I said, very few of us can identify with potentially being that wealthy, but it's being around a person like that, or creating or being a part of a financial system that supports people who are that wealthy. We can be a part of it indirectly. And I think that's the thing that's very, very scary, is that we can still be held responsible, for that. It's like this person who's wealthy got his wealth in a certain way, and I suspect was supported by, people around him, people that work for him and his family, his friends, and all that kind of stuff. And he clearly wasn't getting any kind of counsel to like be charitable, just do the basics and all that kind of stuff. So there's an ecosystem around him that would also be held accountable for his judgment, and I just, again, if anybody comes to this channel and takes anything from this, don't fall for this. Cause like this trick that's going on, this deception that's going on worldwide is just so dumb, it's, again, hyperbolic. And this beast system, to me, the mark of the beast is the last sort of exaggeration for people who are that dumb and gullible enough to go along with that narrative of putting an electronic device in their body that God's just like, those people are completely just actors, and satanic and consistent with the mindset of the person, the rich man in this in Luke 16. And so just don't go anywhere near that, because it's just completely faithless. It's a purely carnal mindset, just more for me, fill up my barn, my storehouse with as much stuff, and more certainty for me, more and more pleasure and all that kind of stuff. And let's just be very, very aware of the fact that the God of the Bible speaks completely against that. And for those, especially in America, Revelation 18 is very, very relevant. And I'll just go through the beginning of it. And after these things, I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon, the great, is fallen, and has become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. So we're dealing with a place, first of all, that is powerful, because it's described as the great. What other nation on earth right now would be in a discussion for being the quote unquote the great? Maybe China, India, us. That would be it. Who would be considered the quote unquote great? I think Russia probably, to some extent, their history, but right now on the world stage, in terms of the main players of the groups that are sort of keeping things moving, so to speak, there's not that many options, and so we also learn more about it. But to me, the list is already shrunk down just by it being called great. And it's also said here, it's going to become the habitation of devils and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. So all these devils, these foul spirits and all that kind of stuff, to me, what they do is they go into people's bodies and then they just cause them to be stupid. They just do things that don't make sense, just purely pleasure seeking. They just do dumb things, evil things. And so that is common, throughout the world for sure. But we see that, here in America, obviously, it's just a complete freak show, really. That's actually kind of obvious. Going on to verse 3, for all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacy. So now we're getting, to me, the list is now down to one, and we're only at verse 3. What other country has really indoctrinated the world through her fornication? And what other country has had all the leaders worldwide gotten rich through the abundance of her delicacies? It's us. It's obvious. It's just what it is. And they're drunk, I think, is also a very important point. It's like, again, it's like drinking is like, again, to me, a form of like exaggeration. It's like, it's just too much. It's excess. And so it's the same kind of thing here. So it's like, it's using drunkenness of the fornication. It's like people have overindulged, worldwide. We all have to some extent or another, but this is referring on the sort of like macroeconomic, on the nation level, that, the leaders are just, they're just caught up, in this, again, profit driven beast system optimization, all that kind of stuff. And then supporting homosexuality, and that whole lifestyle is also, because of America, pushing that. Okay, so to me, just by verse 3, if we're in the end times, we already know who this is. You don't, to me, just reading 18:1-3, you're done, and it just becomes more and more obvious as you read the rest of all of 17 and then the rest of 18. Again, if the earth is flat, the Bible's true. And if the Bible's true and we're living in the end times, America is Mystery Babylon. It's very simple. And it's described in another place as modern day Sodom and Egypt. And so to me, again, just that alone, if the Bible's true, to me, we have to be in the end times strictly just based on the term sodomy itself, because that's in the Bible and God doesn't like it, and he didn't like it back then and he doesn't like it now. So to me, this is the luxury, I would say, of preaching quote unquote end times in the times that we live in now. It's like obvious, it's either very, very close or, in my opinion, very, very, very far away, or it's never going to happen. What the Bible says will happen in Revelation, just strictly based on these few principles, and so going on to verse 4, and I heard another voice, and this is the part that I wanted to sort of end off on in verse 4. And I heard another voice coming from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye not receive of her plagues. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities." So this is the part I wanted to use as a reminder for people. Come out of her, my people. This is what God's saying. Don't be like this place that, again, has indoctrinated the entire world with their fornication. Don't be like them. I don't know how else to say it. It's just, that's all really God tells us to do. It's just, come out of her, my people, that ye not be partakers of her sins. That ye be not partakers of her sins, and that ye not receive of her plague. So don't be like the rich man and Lazarus story. Don't support that structure. Don't applaud that type of person at all, because the economy of God is completely flipped, to what is happening now, literally, but also spiritually. Like, God's not looking down upon a rich person who's enjoying their comfort and luxury every day. And, just like, okay, I'll give him one more day. Like he seems to be pretty happy, he's earned it. God looks at these people in disgust. Like, if there's a person, and it's happening literally right now while I live stream, that is rich and sees a poor person probably literally every day, and they don't do anything about it, God's not excited by that. It's, to me, he's just growing more and more angry, and irritated. And again, he creates everything. So I'm just speaking from an earthly perspective, but there is a judgment for that, for being that clueless and insensitive and inhumane, towards fellow man. And, the poor are growing in number and the rich are decreasing in number. And so, to me, again, this kind of thing is becoming more and more obvious, and these interactions are happening more and more frequently, just because, again, the poor are growing in number. And so the Bible is saying here, come out of her, my people. Just don't be involved in those. If we can help, obviously do what we can to help, financially or otherwise, but don't be like this place, that is being described here in chapter 17 and 18. God hath remembered, for her sins have reached unto heaven. So, like I've said in a prior video, there's a limit. It's not. That's why I think people who don't think that we're end times, to me, have a weak case, because this can't go on forever. Because it's, again, becoming noticeably obvious, that there's sin everywhere. And there's evil and arguments and debates, and debate me on this, debate me on that. Everybody's fighting, and all this kind of stuff. It's like, how much more kind of outlandish and stupid, can the world get? To me, it's not like 10, 15, 20 years down the road. I have no idea what a world would look like in that time frame. I don't want to know, and I would not want to be around then. But to me, it can't be that far, down the road. Just with how, again, noticeably obvious that, like it says here in 5, that these iniquities are, worldwide. And then America is the hub for it, the quote earthly architect for it, because it's indoctrinated the world with here, like it says, abundance of her delicacies, so like excessive consumption, but also, fornication, like I said, homosexuality and slavery, because it's also described as Egypt, which in Exodus is described as the house of bondage or slavery. And so it's also pushing enslavement worldwide through its through the corporations, through the beast system, the 666 system, which again is also obvious for me personally because of Russian bids. Okay. And so the thing I wanted to also say is that so it says in verse 4, this to me is the strongest evidence for me of a quote unquote pre-tribulation rapture. In verse 4 it says, and I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, that ye be not partakers of our sins, and that ye not receive of her plagues. What plagues? Well, thankfully in verse 8 it says, therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death, mourning, famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judgeth her. So for anybody out there who has an ear to hear, once there's any kind of food shortage happening, it's starting to happen, it's creeping into certain part of the U.S., that's the end. We're at the end. If America experiences, like I said, a food shortage, or you start seeing it and prices start rising, people can afford food now. People are struggling to afford rent, mortgage, car, school tuition, all that. That's obvious. Inflation is in that everywhere. And this, again, was why we know that the corporate media is satanic, is because they keep saying that there's no inflation, prices are not rising. So we know, again, it's very, very obvious. You don't even have to be a CPA like myself to know this, but that's obvious, that those prices are rising and have risen dramatically over the years, but it hasn't hit food yet to the extent as it has those other things. So the way it would happen in modern day is not God controlling the weather necessarily in creating a famine, which he's done in the Bible. It would be through financial manipulation. And so credit markets lock up, if there's just less food available, just grocery stores and all that. That's the end. To me, that is the end times. That is one, in my opinion, the secondary thing that has to happen after this quote unquote rapture. And the reason I believe the rapture has to happen first is, like I said, because of verse 4. It says, come out of her, my people, that ye not be partakers of her sins, and that ye not receive of her plagues. So there is going to be a group of quote unquote God's people in America and worldwide that will not experience death, mourning, famine, or America getting burned. And so that would be a people that would be removed before really shit hits the fan. And so that, to me, again, is strong evidence that the Bible supports a pre-tribulation because of Revelation 18:4 and 8. And so, which makes sense to me as well, because if a person is inclined to the Bible and sees that we're very likely in the end times, and then sees that there are food shortages, I mean, what are they going to do? Like, I'm not going to go in, and I'm not even saying I'm super spiritual, but like, I'm not going to go and fight, or wait in line at a food pantry, or like try and get something from the government just so I can survive. Like, what's there to do at that point? And this is not funny, because I think this will happen, in my opinion, soon. I'm not going to like wait in line for food or anything like that. Like, why? For what? It means that the Bible's true. It means that this place that has glorified herself and lived, like verse 3 says, wax rich through the abundance of our delicacies. This place is fallen, like it says in verse 2. It's on its way down. There's no like resurrecting America and rejuvenating it, down the road. It's the last expression of God's evil, making such a hyper consumption ecosystem on earth. Like there's nothing to do after this. Once all these companies, we start realizing that a majority of them, 99% of them, are not necessary to sustain human life. What can we do after that? You don't just like put new money into the system. There's no way to fix it unless the whole thing is completely destroyed. Because like I said, they don't serve basic functions, basic needs. And then fewer and fewer people have gotten rich through these corporations. And so the money is in very, very few people's hands, which naturally leads to instability. And, that's what we have. We have more and more people living paycheck to paycheck if they're lucky. How people joke around like, oh, I'm broke. It's like people are like trying to get to a broke state, where you're like even. Most people are drowned in debt. They have a negative net worth. So they don't even have the luxury of saying that they're broke. And so to me, again, if this is just a strange time period and America just happens to sort of by happenstance fit the verses, all of them in 17 and 18, and really in many places in Revelation and throughout the entire Bible, Jeremiah, everywhere, that would be just a big coincidence to me. It's people are free to believe in coincidences. We have a lot of coincidence theorists out there on the baller side, but for those who have an ear to hear, I think that these things are not far away. They really can't be, because the economy is slowing down. Everybody knows it, and we are the heartbeat of it, as it's stated here in Revelation, and just everybody knows it. Like if the Americans are broke, then the worldwide economy is going to calibrate and adjust itself accordingly, and that's obvious for anybody who's just looking at things, even at a very cursory level. And so we have the mainstream corporate media saying that the last thing, the breath of fresh air for our economy is the consumer is spending. They're doing well and all that, even though we see layoffs everywhere, stores closing. And so that's their last bright light, that they can lie about. And that's not true. And so this excessive amount of propaganda, in the news, financial and otherwise, to me, has to be spiritual, because they're saying things that are just, we all know are not true. It's just obvious. And you could test that with any conversation with anybody. There would be a time maybe 5 or 10 years ago, people could make a case like, yeah, it's not that bad. It's, some people are doing well, people are successful and all that. But now it's becoming more and more clear, again, with the mainstream news, that the economy is slowing down worldwide, and then quote, money velocity slowing down. Money is not circulating through the system, which then means that stores have to close or lay off people, trim, quote unquote, trim the fat. And, once people start getting laid off, then there's a trickle effect in their own personal lives, and then it affects spending. And then the yield curve will acknowledge that, like I said earlier, and that it inverted, recently a couple times. And, people are just saturated with debt, and then something has to, quote unquote, give. And so to me, the system is unique right now, because we've always had rich and poor, like I've read in Luke 16, in the time of Jesus's time, before that, and now. It's really, in many ways, Jesus prophesied that the poor will always be among us. He said that. And so the poor have been prophesied to exist, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you think about it. But this many people so close to, living day to day worldwide is can never have existed throughout human history, because there was never a system in place to create such centralization and such dependence on central banking. And so that's why, again, for those of us who do this, we obviously have to be humble, because we don't know for sure. Really, a lot of things is what Flat Earth taught me. But, we can speak, I would say, very, very boldly and confidently that something in our generation is brewing, from a spiritual perspective. It's just, it has to be. The whole world is just on reaching a boiling point financially. That's without even considering the shape of the earth, and that spiritual, the ball earth deception, and, the religious and moral decay is just the cherry on top, but all those things summed together to me are more and more certainty that we're living in very, very spiritual times. I also thought it was kind of sad, but also if you go on and read verse 9, it says, "And the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her when they see the smoke of her burning." So this will literally be America being burned, and I know, again, that sounds outlandish even to me because I live here, and we see things just, go on day to day. But the Bible is saying that this place called Mystery Babylon, which I believe is America, it's obvious it's America if the Bible is true and we're living in the end times, will literally be burnt, and destroyed through intercontinental ballistic missiles. And so verse 10, this is the part that's sad. "Standing off afar for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, the great city of Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come." So, with all these, weapons and military stuff, which obviously we don't know all of it that's going on behind the scenes, very little. It's not surprising that God can do this. And it's probably, these technologies been around for a long time. "And the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth their merchandise anymore." So all these people will see a place getting absolutely destroyed. And then they'll think hey, who's going to buy our stuff now? They won't be oh man, God is doing something, and he's, judged America and burnt it. They'll be hey, who's going to buy our stuff? This is not funny, but this is how ridiculous the world is. And to me, that verse 18:11 gives us insight into the kind of people we're dealing with. They're just purely profit-driven robots and zombies that they will see an act of God literally happen, and their thought will be just, whoa, okay, so where is this inventory that I have going to be sold, kind of thing, that's why, again, it's to me very, very obvious that God programs people to be a certain way, because no one can be that stupid, and I just, all I recommend through this channel regularly is just don't be that dumb, just be very thankful for anybody out there who realizes how stupid it is to be the people on God's left-hand side, these merchants, these people who fell for this indoctrination, this fornication and all this kind of stuff. Thankfully, we're not one of them. That would just be a really, really pathetic life if you could see literally an act of God right in front of you and you don't even take a moment to worship God or acknowledge God's judgment. Like it says here, "For in 1 hour thy judgment come." All you still continue to think about is buying and selling. And so that is, again, to me, proof that the mark of the beast will be successful, because there will have to be, by definition, a group of people who are just obsessed about buying and selling. That's all they care about. That's all they want to do. They just want to continue to interact with this system at all costs, literally. Even if there's a country being burnt to a crisp, they still want to buy and sell. And so, I mean, it's crazy to think that these things could literally happen, and soon. And in my opinion, we're on the precipice of something happening in America that's not good. The poor are becoming visible, and that number is not shrinking because no one's talking about it. And I'm talking even the religious people. And so this, to me, we're primed for something big, in my opinion. If the church was speaking out against the evil, I'm not even talking about the mainstream churches, just some churches, some religious people. We're talking about the poor, the evil, just resisting the mark of the beast, the big brother surveillance state. Then I would be more inclined to say, yeah, maybe not yet, because there's enough people, there's a vibe on earth right now that we, would know to not, co-sign something like that. But, even I was watching a interaction with Vocab Malone and freaking GMS Houston, and they always ask people, and it's smart for them to ask, preemptively before they get in any religious discussion with a quote unquote Christian is like, what do you think the mark of the beast is? And he's like, oh, it's philosophies, it's like all this kind of stuff and all that. They find it outlandish, that the government would ever exert enough control over people to like make up a story or stories to like get them to put an electronic device in their body. But it's obvious that they will, to many of us, that this system is completely evil. It's like, it's not even close to human. That's why, to me, it's very, very obvious we're in a beast system, because a rich person, like in Luke 16, not giving even the crumbs that fall off their table to a person that they see every single day, a beggar who's getting his sores licked by dogs. Somebody who is like that has to be a beast. They cannot be a human, or any kind of have, much less a spirit. And Jesus says this, if he can't teach us, if we don't do things on an earthly level, how is he going to teach us about the quote unquote transactions and the economy of the spirit world? Or as Abraham is described in Luke 16, Abraham's bosom, how are we supposed to then transact and function in the quote unquote kingdom of heaven if we don't even have the basics of the transactions that God wants to see going on here on earth? And so, again, for anybody out there who has an ear to hear, this should be very, very obvious. Just like it says here in verse 4, come out of her, my people. It just mentally, spiritually, our thoughts, everything that's going on this, especially here in America, it's okay, just call it out. It's ridiculous. I don't think many people will care. So that's the part that I struggle with, having the discernment to know who to share this frustration with. And it's not many people. Certainly here you will have a seat at the table always. But in general, in our day-to-day lives, it's not that easy to know how to, carry ourselves when, for those of us who believe America's Mystery Babylon, how to, carry that truth, really. It's not easy, and so, like it says here, this place called Babylon the Great would be a hold of every foul spirit and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. So God has really maximized, he's turned the dial up, pushed the button all the way up for every kind of evil and confusion is here. To me, this is where it can't get worse. And it says here in verse 5, for her sins have reached unto heaven. There's a limit, like we would have to be real, like how much more evil and confusion and perversion could there be worldwide than what we have on earth? And the difference I would say about the time that we live in now is that we all know it. I think that's people will be like, well, we've had this much throughout human history. Fair enough. But people have not been as aware of the evil. And then there's also a large group of people now, like me, we know that God's behind it. And so if God's behind it, he's not going to let it go on forever. Like our parents wouldn't just torture us every single day, teach us quote unquote lessons and just have that go on forever. Like even our earthly parents wouldn't do that. And some of our earthly parents are evil. Yeah, so God would not do that. And it's a promise in verse 5, for her sins have reached unto heaven and God had remembered her iniquities. And so then after that, he describes a judgment, that happens after that threshold has been reached. And so, one would think we can't be far off just purely from a financial perspective, because the Bible prophesies famines for this place. And, just by coincidence, we have all the market manipulations necessary to orchestrate that, and so all these people in the news, they have to be essentially kind of, to me, kamikaze. And it's not so much them that make me believe that this will happen. It's the fact that a majority of Americans don't call out how obvious and ridiculous the news is. They don't even talk about it, and more and more reason to me why a lot of people are just sort of actors designed to take the mark of the beast is just even all these shootings and stuff like that. It's not even water cooler talk anymore. People don't talk about it, and it's like they don't care. They don't either pay attention to it. They either sort of indirectly know that a lot of these shootings are fake and they don't want to talk about it, or they know that it's going to lead to some kind of political discussion or whatever. But generally, I think people know what stories to not talk about because they know that they're just ridiculous. it's insane. Really everything that's being spewed by the corporate media. And again, that would be very strange to me if it was just like a coincidence. It's just, we just happen to live in a time where pretty much all media outlets are stating everything is great when it's not, stuff like that. So again, people are free to believe that. I think that that's strange. I think, again, spiritual people should be discerned enough to know that there's no way that cannot be orchestrated. That cannot be orchestrated without God's involvement. And so once God's involved, to me, judgment is very, very close by. That's why it's very, very taboo, and it's going to become more and more taboo to talk about God, because once God exists with certainty through like the flat earth and other things, judgment is right nearby, because it's just known. Even non-religious people know that a majority of the goings on earth right now is completely evil, and stupid and void of God. And so, if he's around and we're getting impatient and we're evil people, what would God be thinking? What would he be preparing for as a judgment for all the evil? So, that's all I had for today. I'm not sure if Manny's still around or Mies, but I'll hang out for a couple minutes in case somebody wants to join and chat. But I normally will keep it to Sundays, but today I just this weekend, sorry, I had to do it today. But I'll try and go back to my normal Sunday evening cadence for people who want to keep that time frame. But what else could I talk about? I guess I don't know. Like, I've been sort of following, I guess, the flat Earth stuff, mostly through like whatever comes by on Trolls versus Trolls. But I see more and more debates. I saw a video recently, which I mirrored on my channel, and it's going into more of the optics and all that, and it's good. I think it's becoming more and more obvious, that the Earth is flat and stationary, and I think it's going to give more and more people more and more confidence, for us, but also to share it, with just certainty, really, that the Earth is indeed flat and stationary. And like I said, the truth is so powerful and scary for even like religious people that it's hard for us to digest, much less the average everyday person, and so, I think for me, I'm going to start doing some street stuff. I don't exactly know how I'm going to do it. Again, I have a feeling when I do that, I don't think very many people will want to talk about it. But again, I'm curious. I'll test it out and sample it. And, I bought some signs. I made some signs through Vistaprint. And so like, I'm not going to like get on a bullhorn and yell at people, but I will try and engage people in conversations about the flat Earth. And so, because again, to me, the truth about the flat Earth is great because it's obvious. The mark of the beast still is like theoretical in the sense that it hasn't happened yet. So, it can lead to an agree to disagree, but for just any person who's just open slightly to the looking around us, to me, the flat stationary Earth is self-evident. So in the very least, it will get a person to think about the things that they've been taught and how pretty much potentially everything that we've been taught is false, from the church as well. To me, it's a very, very powerful truth. Even if it just for that moment gets somebody to think about a different reality, it's a good thing, and I certainly would not want to go through life not knowing, the geometry of the Earth, that I live on. So I'm thankful for it, but also it's kind of embarrassing, in my opinion, that we have to debate this. But again, I didn't come up with this, and neither did you. So, this is just the world that we live in. I would just encourage people, just don't go to any extreme. Don't align to this system in any way. Like, just feel very comfortable, I would say, for those truthers out there, especially with a Bible disposition, like it's okay to really make fun of and reject all aspects of the goings on of the society, because even the things that should be very, very obvious for just a normal human don't take place here, So it's just, again, it's a beast system. It's a non-human, sort of transhuman pressure cooker, really, or training ground. It's designed strictly to produce a beast because the system itself is a beast. And so, it should be very, very obvious to us now because of flat Earth, how really all aspects of the goings on this Earth are completely evil. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. I'll go back to my normal programming in the future, but I just wanted to kind of share that today. But hope everyone's doing well, and have a good rest of your weekend. Take care. Bye.